When you begin to realize that colors are not just visual elements, but languages of creation, your perspective shifts entirely. Everything God made communicates. Nothing in creation is random. Light, sound, color, they all carry frequencies that resonate with the spiritual and psychological dimensions of human life. We know this intuitively, even without deep theology. You walk into a room painted bright yellow and feel a surge of energy. You sit in a space drenched in gray and feel your spirit grow still, maybe even heavy. That's not coincidence. It's a reflection of divine design, of the way creation mirrors the invisible order of heaven. God built meaning into matter, and color is one of his subtlest tools. When Scripture speaks of colors, it's rarely aesthetic. It's always symbolic. White, robes for righteousness; scarlet for sacrifice; gold for divinity; blue for revelation. These aren't arbitrary assignments, they're reflections of spiritual frequencies. White is clarity, the absence of hiddenness. Blue mirrors the sky, the realm of God's vision and truth. Red is life itself. Blood, vitality, passion, covenant. Even black in the Bible represents mystery and the unknown, the darkness out of which light emerges. So when we deal with colors, we're not just talking about external decoration. We're talking about spiritual codes embedded in the fabric of existence. You're literally wearing frequencies that align or clash with your current season of purpose. The problem is that most people move through life unaware of the meanings behind what they consume or display. They assume everything is neutral, that all choices are purely aesthetic, and in doing so, they disconnect themselves from discernment. Yet the spiritual life is precisely about becoming conscious of what was once unconscious. God calls you to awareness. Awareness is the beginning of transformation. When he reveals something as simple as don't wear this color, he's not micromanaging your choices. He's awakening your perception. He's training your eyes to see how everything around you carries influence. That's divine education. Not through punishment or superstition, but through subtle revelation. And here's the remarkable thing. When God draws your attention to something seemingly small, it's rarely about that small thing. It's about training your spirit for greater sensitivity. If you can listen to him about color, you can listen to him about calling. If you can obey in the minor, you prepare yourself for the major. Every command is a test of alignment. Every revelation is an invitation to maturity. The question is never just why this color, but why this timing? What is God preparing in your atmosphere that requires you to let go of this? Because sometimes the very hues you wear carry the memory of old seasons, the vibrations of environments that no longer fit your destiny. Color, at its core, is energy. Physics teaches us that color is simply light at different wavelengths. Spiritually, that principle carries over. Different frequencies of light resonate with different aspects of your soul. That's why you feel different in white than in black, in red than in blue. These aren't coincidences, they're signals. You can think of your life like a spiritual radio. When your frequency aligns with God's wavelength, you hear his voice clearly. But when you surround yourself with conflicting frequencies, your connection becomes static. You stop discerning clearly, and everything feels muddled. Sometimes God isn't just speaking about what you're wearing, he's speaking about what you're tuned into. Now, this brings us to the second revelation. There are certain colors, or more accurately, certain energies that block spiritual flow, not because they are inherently evil, but because they carry associations, vibrations, or memories that don't harmonize with where God is taking you. When I say never wear this color again, it's not a condemnation of pigment, it's an invitation to discernment. It means God is pointing out something that interferes with your spiritual clarity. Perhaps that color symbolizes mourning when he's calling you into joy. Perhaps it represents pride when he's leading you toward humility. Maybe it carries emotional residue from a time when you were lost. And every time you wear it, it quietly reawakens an old version of yourself. We underestimate how memory attaches to matter. The clothes you wear hold memory, not just physical, but emotional and spiritual. That shirt you wore when you went through heartbreak, the color you always chose when you were angry, the tone that reminded you of failure. All of these become silent anchors to your past. God, in His infinite wisdom, sometimes tells you to remove them, not because the color itself is cursed, but because it carries energy that your spirit no longer needs. He's freeing you from invisible threads that tie you to places He's already delivered you from. When God warns about a color, it's symbolic of a deeper cleansing process. He's asking, are you willing to remove what I reveal, even if you don't understand why? Because faith begins where understanding ends. Obedience precedes explanation. You'll never fully grasp the spiritual resonance of color until you first respect the spiritual principle of obedience. The power isn't in the avoidance, it's in the alignment. When you obey, your frequency adjusts. You stop operating from the residue of the past and begin vibrating in harmony with divine purpose. And this is where the world often gets it wrong. People mock spiritual discernment because they interpret it through the lens of superstition. But there's a difference between fear-based restriction and revelation-based wisdom. Superstition imprisons you. Revelation refines you. One says, don't touch this or bad things will happen. The other says, don't touch this because better things are waiting. God's commands are never designed to shrink your life. They're meant to expand your capacity to receive His presence. Think about it. If color represents frequency and frequency represents energy, then the spiritual life is a process of tuning yourself toward light and away from distortion. There are some wavelengths that pull you out of peace. Not because the color is inherently dark, but because your spirit isn't aligned with it anymore. When you feel an unexplainable heaviness, anxiety, or confusion that arises every time you engage with something specific, that's your discernment speaking. The Spirit of God communicates not only through Scripture, but through sensitivity. The key is learning to listen, not only with your ears, but with your atmosphere. When you begin to notice patterns, how certain shades make you restless, how others bring peace, you're starting to decode the language of the Spirit. You're realizing that God's voice doesn't always thunder from heaven. Sometimes it whispers through the details of your environment. Every time you sense that subtle nudge, don't wear that, don't go there, don't say that, He's teaching you that obedience sharpens awareness. The more you obey, the clearer the guidance becomes. The less you argue, the more your path illuminates. You may not understand it fully now, but discernment is God's way of protecting your momentum. He removes what interferes before you even realize it's harmful. The color, He tells you not to wear, might represent a season of confusion, or perhaps a spiritual influence that once cloaked you in heaviness. When He says, don't wear this again, it's His way of saying, don't return to that version of yourself. Don't clothe your new identity in old energy. Every divine restriction is a redirection, a step toward a more radiant alignment with who you truly are in Him. And that's where the beauty lies. God isn't trying to strip you of expression. He's trying to teach you that every expression carries consequence. He's shaping your awareness until even the smallest choices echo with eternal purpose. Because the moment you start seeing colors as symbols of divine resonance, you start realizing that life itself is a tapestry woven with meaning. Every shade, every tone, every shift. An invitation to listen, to discern, to align. And it all begins when you start asking not, what's wrong with this, but what is this doing to my spirit? That question alone begins to open the door to revelation, preparing you for the next level of understanding that awaits in the following keys. There's a thin line between discernment and superstition, and that line is drawn by truth. Human beings have an inherent need to understand patterns, to interpret meaning in what they experience. It's part of our divine architecture. We are wired to seek connection between the seen and the unseen. But the danger begins when that pursuit of meaning detaches from wisdom and becomes driven by fear. That's where superstition takes root. It's a counterfeit form of spirituality, one that mimics discernment but lacks revelation. Superstition binds you in anxiety, making you believe that power lies in objects, colors, or rituals. Discernment, on the other hand, liberates you because it anchors power where it belongs, in the voice of God and the alignment of your spirit with His truth. When you mistake fear for discernment, you start seeing danger where there is none. You begin to think God is fragile, as if His favor could be undone by the color of a shirt or the shape of an ornament. That's not faith. That's bondage. Faith doesn't live in paranoia. It lives in peace. God doesn't call you to live afraid of symbols, but to understand them. The mature believer learns that the world is full of meaning, but not every meaning holds dominion over you. You are not a slave to symbols. You are a steward of significance. When God reveals something about a color or an object, He's not telling you that it controls you. He's showing you that you must control what influences you. Discernment is about mastery, not fear. This is why spiritual discernment must always rest on the foundation of truth, not emotion. Truth is the lens through which revelation becomes balanced. Without truth, you drift into obsession, chasing signs and signals until you lose sight of substance. But with truth, even the smallest instruction becomes transformative. Truth is what separates divine instruction from irrational compulsion. It's what allows you to say, yes, God may warn me against something today, but He does so for purpose, not paranoia. You obey, not because you fear punishment, but because you trust His perspective more than your own. And this is where the educational dimension of spirituality begins. Discernment is a skill, a discipline. It's not a mystical gift reserved for the elite. It's a capacity anyone can cultivate through awareness, humility, and obedience. The moment you start asking God, teach me to see the meaning behind what I encounter, you begin to perceive how layered reality truly is. You start seeing patterns in your emotional reactions, in your physical environment, in your inner state. You begin to realize that the spiritual and material aren't two separate worlds. They are intertwined expressions of one divine reality. Learning to discern is learning to listen with your entire being. Your mind processes logic, your body feels energy, and your spirit perceives resonance. God speaks through all three channels, but only when you quiet the noise long enough to hear. That's why discernment demands stillness. You can't perceive divine frequency while trapped in the static of fear, anger, or pride. Those emotions distort perception. They make you react rather than respond. And when you react, you lose sensitivity to truth. So when God reveals something about your environment, whether it's a color, an object, or a person, it's not to make you afraid of the external world, but to train your perception of the internal one. He's teaching you to feel the weight of atmosphere, to notice the energy that follows you, to identify when peace departs and why. This is spiritual intelligence, the highest form of awareness. It transforms how you live, how you dress, how you speak, how you choose what to engage with. Not because you're fearful, but because you've learned to sense harmony and discord at a spiritual level. Now, this leads to the fourth truth, vibrational alignment with God's presence. We often think of God as distant, somewhere beyond our reach. But that's not how the spiritual dimension works. God's presence is not merely a concept, it's an atmosphere. It's a frequency of being that you can either align with or drift away from. And alignment is not achieved through ritual. It's achieved through resonance. When your thoughts, words, and actions vibrate with truth, peace, and gratitude, you naturally harmonize with the frequency of divine presence. But when your mind is filled with resentment, your body with tension, and your spirit with confusion, you begin to lose that alignment. It's like tuning a radio. The signal is always there, but if your frequency is slightly off, all you hear is noise. That's what happens when you live disconnected from discernment. The signal of divine wisdom is still broadcasting, but your internal state is too distorted to receive it. The purpose of revelation, like God telling you to avoid a certain color or habit, is to recalibrate your signal. It's not punishment, it's refinement. He's clearing static from your spirit so that His guidance can flow without interference. When you align with the frequency of God's presence, everything in your life begins to synchronize. You start recognizing how peace follows obedience, how clarity follows surrender, how favor follows humility. These aren't coincidences. They're patterns of resonance. God is consistent, and His presence moves through order when your thoughts are in chaos. Your life reflects chaos. When your thoughts are rooted in truth, your life begins to stabilize. That's alignment. It's the process of tuning your spirit to divine order until your external reality begins to echo it. But alignment is not automatic. It's something you practice moment by moment. Every time you choose forgiveness over bitterness, you adjust your vibration. Every time you express gratitude instead of complaint, you raise your frequency. Every time you obey a quiet instruction, even one as small as changing what you wear or removing an object that disturbs your peace, you refine your alignment with God's flow. You are literally adjusting your spiritual resonance to match heaven's pattern. And the more you align, the more sensitive you become. You begin to feel when something is off. Not because someone told you, but because your spirit knows. You sense heaviness where there should be peace, confusion where there should be clarity. That sensitivity isn't weakness, it's wisdom. It's the mark of someone who has learned to live with a tuned soul, and that tuning process is ongoing. God continually brings you deeper, showing you new layers of awareness. But remember this, alignment is fragile. It must be guarded. Every choice you make either strengthens or weakens it. When you surround yourself with chaos, loud negativity, toxic influences, or environments that drain your peace, you're distorting your frequency. When you fill your space with stillness, light, gratitude, and truth, you're harmonizing it. God's presence doesn't compete with noise. It dwells in balance. You can't hear divine instruction if your life is constantly loud. So, when God reveals something as specific as never wear this color again, He's not calling you to superstition, but to sensitivity. He's saying, protect your alignment, guard your frequency, stay connected. The goal is not control, but coherence. The deeper you go into discernment, the more you realize how every detail of your existence is interconnected, how your emotions influence your environment, how your environment influences your faith, how your faith influences your perception. It's one great system of resonance. And your task is to keep it in harmony with the presence of the divine, and that's what vibrational alignment really means. It's the ongoing process of choosing resonance over resistance, truth over illusion, peace over confusion. It's realizing that the presence of God is not just an experience you chase in a church service. It's an atmosphere you cultivate through awareness, obedience, and harmony. Every instruction He gives, no matter how strange it seems, is a note in the divine symphony that He's teaching you to play. One frequency at a time, as the journey unfolds toward what He will reveal next. There's something deeply transformative about purity. Not the shallow version that merely polishes appearance, but the kind that clarifies essence. Purity in its truest form isn't about perfection or fragility. It's about alignment with truth. It's the removal of what no longer belongs so that what's genuine can finally breathe. When God begins to cleanse your life, He doesn't start by condemning the visible. He starts by revealing the invisible. He begins in the quiet spaces of thought, in the subtle patterns of behavior, in the internal atmospheres you've allowed to settle around your soul. The process often feels uncomfortable because it's surgical. It cuts away attachments, illusions, and habits that have disguised themselves as identity. Clarity, then, is the fruit of purity, and simplicity is its companion. The more you simplify your external life, the clearer your internal world becomes. Complexity breeds confusion. Simplicity fosters focus. God is not found in clutter. Spiritual or emotional, when your spirit is overwhelmed with excess, when you hold on to too many voices, opinions, or attachments, the divine frequency becomes muffled. But when you strip away the unnecessary, you begin to hear again. That's why obedience often feels like loss. It's the removal of what you think you need so you can finally receive what actually sustains you. You see, purity is not sterile, it's potent. It's the highest state of order in a chaotic world. And when God asks you to remove something, a color, a habit, a pattern, it's never about deprivation, it's about decluttering your connection with Him. The removal is a test of trust, because to purify your life, you must first confront your attachment to what pollutes it. We often pray for clarity while protecting the very things that cloud our vision. We want revelation but resist refinement. Yet revelation without purification is distortion. You can't see clearly through a fog lens, and God will not amplify a voice that refuses to be tuned. Simplicity is the spiritual principle that takes you from noise to knowing. It's why prophets withdrew into wildernesses, why Christ often went alone to pray, why silence has always been a sacred language. When life becomes too loud, the voice of truth retreats into the background. And so God begins to teach through subtraction. He removes the unnecessary to restore the essential. What you lose in comfort, you gain in clarity. What you let go of externally, you reclaim internally. And in that process, you begin to notice that your peace returns. Not because life became easier, but because you stopped carrying what wasn't yours to hold. And this isn't merely a moral exercise, it's an energetic one. Every object, memory, and color you keep carries resonance. Every thought you entertain emits a frequency. When your environment is filled with residue from old pain, old dreams, or old identities, it's like static in the background of your soul. You can't tune into divine instruction while old frequencies are still playing. So God whispers, remove it. And the moment you obey, something inside you shifts. It's as if space opens in your spirit for light to fill what darkness once occupied. That's why purification is never punishment. It's preparation. The removal always precedes the renewal. But here lies the paradox. The process of purification often feels like disorientation. When God begins to strip away the familiar, it can seem as though you're losing your foundation. In truth, He's revealing what your foundation was built on. Was it built on comfort or conviction, on ritual or relationship, on appearance or authenticity? When He asks you to let go of something seemingly trivial, He's measuring your willingness to trust Him in the unseen. Because purity isn't about doing less. It's about becoming more precise. It's learning to live with intention rather than impulse, to speak from truth rather than reaction, to dress, act, and exist in harmony with divine order rather than human chaos. Obedience is what turns purity from an idea into an experience, is what transforms clarity into transformation. But obedience has been misunderstood for centuries. People think of it as subjugation, as though God's instructions are arbitrary rules meant to suppress individuality. Yet true obedience is the highest form of freedom, because it liberates you from the tyranny of your own confusion. It's the recognition that there is wisdom greater than your will, perspective beyond your perception. Every act of obedience is an act of alignment, an adjustment that brings you closer to resonance with divine design. When God tests you with small instructions, He's not measuring your compliance, He's measuring your readiness for stewardship. The person who can follow divine direction in the small will be entrusted with revelation in the great. That's the law of growth. It's why the spiritual path often begins with mundane acts. Change what you wear, stop going there, speak differently, forgive this person. To the untrained mind, these seem trivial, but to the spiritually awakened, they are acts of tuning. Each instruction, each act of obedience sharpens your frequency until your entire life begins to hum with divine coherence. You might think that removing a single color from your life is insignificant, but imagine what that symbolizes. Your willingness to let go of something purely because God said so. That level of surrender reshapes the architecture of your soul. It shifts you from intellectual belief to embodied faith. You move from saying you trust God to living as though His every word holds the power to reorient your destiny. And in that trust, transformation begins. The process of transformation through obedience is never comfortable, because obedience demands death to pride. It requires humility, the willingness to say, I don't understand, but I trust. That's the crucible where the old self dissolves. You begin to release control, to step into the flow of divine timing, to stop resisting the rhythm of growth. You realize that every divine instruction, no matter how strange, is a step toward your refinement. God doesn't test to humiliate, He tests to elevate. He's building capacity within you. You can think of obedience as a conversation between your current self and your potential self. The current self resists, the potential self responds. Every time you obey, you silence the resistance and amplify the response. Over time, the potential becomes reality. You evolve into the person who no longer debates divine direction, but delights in it. That's when obedience stops feeling like discipline and starts feeling like destiny. And the rewards of such obedience extend far beyond the immediate moment. Each act of surrender creates ripples that reorder your atmosphere. Peace begins to settle where tension once lived. Opportunities begin to appear where stagnation once lingered. Relationships that align with your new frequency begin to replace those that drained you. The law of resonance applies. When you align with divine obedience, you attract divine order. Transformation through obedience is not about earning God's favor. It's about expanding your capacity to carry it. Favor cannot rest on what's fragmented. It rests on what's whole, what's willing, what's tuned. And that's why every small act of obedience matters. It's the spiritual equivalent of tuning an instrument before a great symphony. Each correction prepares you for harmony. Each surrender sharpens your tone. Until one day you realize you're no longer striving to find God's frequency, you're living in it. And yet, this process continues. Every new level of clarity demands a new level of obedience. Every fresh revelation invites deeper purification. The moment you think you've mastered the art of surrender, God reveals another layer. Not to burden you, but to expand you. To draw you closer to the fullness of who you were meant to become, as the next unveiling of truth begins to unfold beyond this point.